He's like, if I were to attack this place, what would I do? And that helps him figure out how to defend that place. Okay, so he's going to spend day after day touring these heights, and he doesn't follow a particular rhythm. Sorry, this is why I don't use PowerPoint. Okay, so he inspects the heights. He doesn't follow a routine because he wants everyone to be vigilant. If he knows he shows up at this particular spot at 2 o'clock every day, of course at 2 o'clock you're going to be ready. But tomorrow I'm going to show up at 10:30. No, are you ready then? And so he keeps doing these inspections, figuring out how he's going to defend, so he becomes intimately familiar with Harper's Ferry, which will become really important for him. He also has one of the most important partnerships of the entire war is formed there. That's not only just with Major Hawks, his quartermaster, who's an incredibly profane man and a genius when it comes to logistics, and he speaks fluent mule, which is really important. But he also captures a shipment of federal horses, one of which Jackson then gets for his wife. It's a nice little sorrel called Fancy. But Jackson ends up liking the horse so much he keeps it for himself. And his horse, Little Sorrel, as the men will call it, becomes the most important partnership of Jackson's entire career. And if anybody here is a horse owner, you know every horse has its own personality, its own temperament. Sorrel is particularly calm in the midst of fighting, which is one reason Jackson liked it. And so he has great affection. Little Sorrel takes on such mythic proportions during and after the war that he's given a pleasant retirement at the Virginia Military Institute, where his body is now stuffed and on display, and his bones are buried at the head of the parade ground. Veterans would show up after the war and cook bits of Little Sorrel's hair on his tail, so the poor thing looks so ragged by the time he ended up dying. So Jackson has the chance to attack Harper's Ferry during the Valley Campaign. Here we can see all these little squiggly lines as he's marching, moving, and trying to manipulate things. John Slow is the man who's in charge of defending this. After capturing the Winchester on May 25th, he's going to send lead elements up to Charlestown and then threaten Harper's Ferry. If he can grab that position, a good strategic, not really a strategic place, but a good tactical win for him. By that point, the Federals had regained it, so they're going to defend this. And because Jackson knew the terrain so well, he knew the key was over here. So he was going to send the 2nd Virginia to try to outflank this position. But the Federals are going to then basically seal off the peninsula and force Jackson to try to kind of come in. And then they fall back and seal it off again. And with their flanks secure, Jackson can't get around them. He's able to kind of hold, the Federals are able to hold Jackson off. And then that's when he gets word that that pincer movement around Strasburg is closing in on it. And so Jackson's going to have to pull out. So Jackson kind of knows the ground, knows how to approach this. He's got some good ideas. So when the Antietam campaign opens up, what Lee wants to do is send Jackson down to Harper's Ferry, because as Lee goes into Maryland and up toward Pennsylvania, if Harper's Ferry is in his rear, it's going to threaten his supplies. So he's got to capture Harper's Ferry in order to have a successful campaign. So he's going to send Jackson in command of 3 separate columns to get to Harper's Ferry, capture the arsenal, and then reunite with the rest of the army. Jackson's going to be in command of 2/3 of Lee's army over the course of this campaign. And even to get into position where Jackson has to coordinate the movement of 3 columns, cross 2 different rivers, get up over several mountain passes, and into position in coordinated fashion is pretty incredible, considering nobody has cell phones or walkie-talkies. Okay? So Walker's going to come in here from the south, occupy these heights in Virginia, again with the idea of bombarding down into Harper's Ferry. We're going to have Lafayette McLaws up here on South Mountain. McLaws, once he starts to get into position, gets word of federal movement behind him. There aren't supposed to be Yankees in position at this point, but Robert E. Lee has distributed his mimeographed copies of his orders, one of which is wrapped around 3 cigars that gets left in a field, found by the Federals, who would discover that it's Robert E. Lee's orders for the campaign, the infamous Lost Order 191. And now, George McClellan says, if I can't whip Bobby Lee with this, I'll go home. And and he's going to send forces to try to sneak up on Jackson under William Franklin. So McLaws is going to try to hold Franklin off at one of the battles of South Mountain. McLaws will then get driven down into Happy Valley, and he'll kind of fall back along this ridge line. Look at that. This is why PowerPoint hates me. Right? So McLaws will then fall back, get into position, and hold off Franklin's pursuit, even as he tries to warn Jackson, like, hey, we better speed this up. While that's going on, Jackson's going to come in from the west with the main force. He's going to position himself along Schoolhouse Ridge, and from Schoolhouse Ridge here, and from Loudon Heights here, we're going to bombard down into Harper's Ferry. But the Federals are able to resist. He's not going to be able to force Harper's Ferry to capitulate by artillery alone. So he's going to look to try to do an infantry assault. First thing he's going to do is get some more artillery down on a little platform over here so that he can fire and outflank the Federal position here. But he's going to send A.P. Hill's guys down and around. Notice that here, General Miles doesn't have the whole peninsula sealed off. These cliffs are too steep, he believes. Confederates can't get around this flank. So A.P. Hill goes around the flank. These guys have to crawl up a mountain. It's like a sheer cliff. But they get into position. Jackson's going to launch sort of a diversion here along the center to hold their attention. As Hill gets into position here, these guys open up. Miles suddenly finds himself in terrible position. He can't fall back. He's not able to salvage his spot. He's going to have to surrender. Okay? He'll actually get killed in the ensuing surrender. He'll get killed before the surrender negotiations finish. And Jackson is able to complete the capture of Harper's Ferry. It takes longer than it's supposed to. Robert E. Lee is ready to call off the entire campaign because Jackson's tied up. George McClellan is closing in with unexpected speed, and then word arrives that Harper's Ferry has fallen. That gives Lee the courage to then stake out a position along Antietam Creek, and it will lead to the Battle of Antietam on the 17th of September. Jackson will march his troops from Harper's Ferry to join up with Lee and take the northern position along Lee's line. He'll leave A.P. Hill back at Harper's Ferry. At this point, Hill's been under arrest because he disobeyed orders. Jackson arrested him, took him out of arrest so that he could complete the surrender, but that is going to fester for a while. That all relates to marching orders from Cedar Mountain. I can talk about that later. Okay. So Hill finishes the surrender, marches up to join the rest of the army, only to show up late in the afternoon on the 17th as Federals have crossed the southern portion of Antietam Creek. They're driving against the Confederate position. Looks like finally Ambrose Burnside is going to score a victory down there, and here comes A.P. Hill's Light Division at the moment of crisis, at the spot of crisis, able to blunt Burnside's advance, stop the Federal position, and it's going to save the day for the Confederates. And Jackson will get a lot of that credit because, of course, it falls under Jackson's command. And so I see that skeptics will look at this and say, like, yeah, but Miles is in an inherently indefensible position. He's a B-list commander at best, probably a C-list commander. Is Jackson really all that awesome? I think so. Because of the way he's able to coordinate his forces, because he was able to use his knowledge of the ground, because he was able to adapt when his first plan didn't work, to come up with a second plan that did. So all the things that you want out of a good commander come to the forefront. And as we think about this surrender, let's put it in context. Okay? I have some cool little animation here. It's not working on it. The Harper's Ferry got about 12,400 Federals that are captured. It's the largest surrender of Federal troops in the war. It's the largest surrender of United States Army troops until the Philippines in World War II. Okay? Who else is scoring those sorts of surrenders? This dude from out west. Okay? Grant captures 13,000 guys at Fort Donelson, 30,000 at Vicksburg, 28,000 at Appomattox. Grant gets 3 big surrenders. How many does Robert E. Lee have? How many does Stonewall Jackson have? So if we're just looking at sheer numbers, sheer impact, sheer context, Jackson's capture of Harper's Ferry stands among the most significant surrenders in the entire history of the U.S. Army. It's no small thing. So perhaps Harper's Ferry is Jackson's greatest achievement in the war. Some of those things we think of as great achievements, maybe not as great as we necessarily thought. Some of those things that we think of as great achievements, maybe they're mixed results. But he does have a few things that are categorically fantastic. And that, of course, is what propels him into mythic status. But I think if we're able to step back away from that myth and look at what Jackson does well, what he maybe does less well, that helps us better appreciate those things he does well. Because he's human just like us. He does make mistakes. He is fallible. So that when he does achieve greatness, it's because he overcomes those fallibilities, not because he's some God who can wave his hand and make magic things happen. I'll leave you with this thought tonight. Sort of tie it back to the experience Stephanie and I had at the Jackson Shrine. Because as we look at that larger-than-life Jackson at Manassas, that it obscures that story that we discovered at the Jackson Shrine as Jackson is spending his last few days. He's praying, he's surrounded by his loved ones, his condition deteriorates. His wife comes up from Richmond bringing their 6-month-old child. And when Jackson dies, it isn't the loss of a legend, it's the loss of a husband, a father. And that's why his story resonates so strongly with me, because I am a husband and father. It was through my daughter that I discovered this story. And I think about Jackson in that bed, praying over his infant daughter, who he never gets to see again, who grows up without a dad. It's important to remember the humanity of all of these people we talk about. They're not just numbers. They're people, just like you and me. These tragedies are certainly national in scope, but they're tragedies on a personal level. And as we continue our studies of the Civil War, let's never forget